Okay, as you will both discover, I have a rather warped sense of humor, and I'm proud of it. It works for me. And it gets people interested either in Harry Potter or in stamp collecting, hopefully both. So here we are with the true first slide. Now, this is the Milwaukee Philatelic Society putting on Milcopex. And here is what is to be in the program, how it all began, at least for me. Where is it going? What is the difference between thematics and topicals? The difference between collecting and exhibiting, printers and publishing software, the story of the golden thread, and what I push for, which is creativity. Now, when I started, I had been both a stamp collector and a reader of science fiction since I would say about 8 years old. When Harry Potter came out, I really fell in love with it. It was excellent writing. The movies were outstanding. And one night I sat down and asked myself, is there any way I can combine these two hobbies? And I decided I can try and exhibit. So what I did was I got a sheet of paper and a pen, and I started with the first book, and I started to record every single noun that I found. Because nouns, if you remember back to your basic English, are people, places, and things. What appears on stamps? People, places, and things. So that's how I developed my first want list. I went to my first show as an exhibitor. I believe it was 2010. And I got one poor judge out of Canada as my first responder, and he knew nothing about Harry Potter. So I got a silver bronze. But at the feedback session, I said, I really need help, and I know it. And simply telling me what's wrong is not going to do it. I need to see it at the frames. A nice lady off to one side asked, may I toddle along? And I said, sure. The judge looked as if he had just been snake bit. But being a gentleman, he said yes. So the three of us toddled over to my frames, and the two of them got into a rather heated discussion about what I had in my exhibit and whether it belonged or didn't belong. And it went on for about 10, 15 minutes, and I barely got a word in edgewise. Then the gentleman, my first responder, got called away on show business. I looked at the lady, she looked at me and said, hi, I'm Nancy Clark, and I am also a Potterholic. Now, if you do not know, Nancy is a judge, a national judge, a senior judge, an international judge. She's been U.S. commissioner a couple of times. And until just recently, she was the president of Boston 2026. So no wonder the other poor fellow felt that he was snake bit. He was way out of his class, and he knew it. Now, the way here in the US, or at least the way I define the difference between topical and thematic, is topical is a very limited coverage. The best example I use is owls. If all you are showing is every single species of owl, you are in fine shape. That is a topical. But if you are also showing the nests that owls make, or you're showing the crevices in barns that they often take over, if you're showing the animals that they capture and eat for food, you know, if you show some babies or some eggs, that expands it into being a thematic story. And here is how, here in the US, that's how we define it. Now, there is, ATA has a nifty looking flow chart on it. Some people have said it looks like spaghetti. So here's spaghetti. And here's the flow chart. This shows the difference between topical on the left, thematic on the right, and what here in the US we used to call the display class in the middle. And display class often will use non-philatelic items, memorabilia, some coins, stamps, cards, Cinderellas, medals, programs, tickets for shows, anything so long as it does not overpower the exhibit. But that is how that's how we look upon it, at least here in the US. I'm not sure about other countries. Okay, at this point, I want to talk a little bit about printers and publishing systems, software. Here in the US, almost everyone used to rely on what we call 8.5 by 11 printers, 8.5 by 11 pages. So for those of you overseas, that's pretty close to your A4 paper in size. Recently, though, the cost of 11 by 17 printers, as far as the size of the paper being printed, has dropped dramatically. We can get a very good color 11 by 17 printer for about $200 or less, depending on the time of the year. If they're going out of style, which often happens in the fall, you can get them easily for the $150 range. I encourage people to use some sort of publishing software. Doesn't matter which one, but you try using Microsoft Word to make pages, it just doesn't work real well. It's very hard on you. Now, if you're just doing a collection, you might get away with it, but still, there aren't that many companies producing album pages anymore. So you're pretty much encouraged to make your own pages. And especially if you have a few pieces that are special, then you really need to make your own pages. And this is a good way to do it. Now, here's the first double page of my exhibit. The things I point out to people, especially beginners, is the size of my title. If it's a real small title, some people walking by literally will not see your exhibit. You know, they just think it's a continuation of the prior one. And you do not want that to occur. You want to catch their interest. You want to grab them by the cloak and shake them and say, I'm important. I want you to read me. You really need to do so. So I strongly encourage people to use a larger title than what is the norm. Okay, here's the exhibit plan. Now, I am working, obviously, on a literary thematic exhibit. Most literature exhibits either key on the writer and try to tell his or her story, or they pick one story or novel and tell that story, that plot line. I decided to take a different approach. And in my case, I looked upon it from the point of view of the writer. Now, most writers, especially if they're doing a novel, will have an area, the little 3x5 cards or the computer equivalent thereof, that tells them about their characters. In this case, it tells them about their hobbies, their games, their pastimes. Being fantasy, I have an area on wands, have an area on spells. I have an area on the magical creatures that they encounter. I have an area on the different locations where they are. And of course, we have a small section on outpost and transportation. And only then do I get to the plot. There is an excellent exhibit out there from Sweden. A young gal has won, I think, the top award for youth with her 4-frame exhibit just on book 1. That tells you what happens when you get involved with Harry Potter. There are a lot of things going on, a lot of people. But my approach to exhibiting here, it took a while for the local judging corps to understand it. It took a while for me to understand it, but it is working. Now, I'm going to give it some quick examples. The first one is character names. I noticed going through all the books, there was a strong contingent of gals, both the contemporaries with Harry and some of the adult women who were named after flowers. A lot of the boys and men were named after stars and constellations. So if you notice a pattern like that, it makes it a lot easier to find the material that you need. And if you do a little research, you will discover, like right in the middle there, Dursley. That's the name of the last name of the aunt and uncle who took in Harry Potter. And J.K. Rowling picked that name because she drove by this little town on the train, and it was the most drab and depressing place she had ever seen. So, little things, you pick up on that you can use in either an exhibit or in your collection. Now, I mentioned the gal from Sweden. She sent me a show cancel that she had designed for one of her home shows, and it has a wand and it has a broomstick with it. Now, in my case, for the wands, everything worthwhile was made by Ollivanders in London. And Ollivander only used the best quality items, specifically dragon heart string, unicorn hair, and phoenix tail feathers. So that's the first row of this exhibit. Then I go into by individual and talk about what wood they made the wand out of. So I'd show a picture of the tree. And that made it very easy, both for me to assemble and for people to understand. Then having a little creativity helps. There's quite a bit of work at Hogwarts teaching people how to do transfiguration, changing one thing into another. So a pair of rabbits into a pair of slippers. So I got a pair of rabbits up here. I got to find see, that slipper actually is part of a mini sheet. So there wasn't a second slipper, unfortunately. But here we have the beetle being changed into buttons. So once again, it's a little bit of creativity. Now, this is not so much for the two of you, but for larger groups. Why is this cover important? And the time's up. If you noticed real quick, there was no postage stamp on it, but there was this imprint of a unicorn. There's more than one way to use the cover. I use it for Harry Potter. People who work telegraph stamps will use this for the German telegraph offices, because being in Germany, they were part of the postal system. So they did not have to pay to send their reports back to the main office. So that's how it worked out for them. Now, remember earlier on, I said, you develop a list of all the nouns. In this case, one of my nouns from the very first book was the London Zoo, because the Dursleys took their son, Dudley, and Harry to visit the London Zoo. So I was very, very happy. This was one of the very first things I picked up out of a dealer box when I started collecting for the exhibit. Now, we all know there are goblins in the storyline. Did you know that goblins actually cleaned? Because we have the Goblin Vacuum Cleaner Company. So, you missed a little bit. We have one of the people from the other group here in the building just wandered in, so have a seat.
Well, I wanted to see what was going on at least. But,
Mhm.
It hasn't started yet.
No.
Is anybody else showing up?
Well, I have a couple people online.
Okay.
Hmm.
Well, I feel wonderful.
Oh, what's it?
Yep.
Mhm. I don't know what the issue is with that.
I'm fine.
projector.
I'm not necessarily going to stay forever, but
Right.
Well, you can say as long as you want.
Mhm. Okay. Anyone who's read Harry Potter knows about the Forbidden Forest and the mighty trees that were in there. This is part of a cover that Nancy Clark, who I mentioned earlier, found for me out of a dollar box. But when we take a closer look, this cover actually had a magical connection. It was mailed to the Dolores Company in Chicago, Illinois. The Dolores Company was one of the largest suppliers of voodoo equipment in the world. So that made for a nice incidental connection. And sometimes judges will help you out. One time, a judge tapped me on the shoulder and said, there's something, the dealer over there at the far side of the room, I've had them put it aside for you. A little too expensive for him to buy for me. But I took one look at this booklet and said, yes, that belongs in the exhibit. And it's a very nice, I think that's a spring witch out of the Nordic countries. Then one thing that is rather hard to show in stamp collecting, since we're predominantly two-dimensional, is movement. And I got lucky, since we do have some incidences of mushrooms in the book. We have animation. This came out of the Fantasia movie. And every once in a while, we find something that we can try to use. There's another place where to pass an exam, they have to dance some pumpkins across the table. And I thought that this was enough pineapples to justify it. Now, sometimes it helps to know a bit of a foreign language. In this case, if you know the Harry Potter system, you will recognize the name Firenze. Firenze is Italian for Florence. And this is an easy way to prove it because we have Firenze in the cancel and we have Florence in the return address, which is very nice. As some of you know, we, for topicals and thematics, we want a variety of elements, as we call them. And going with a meter cancel is a good way to do that, because here we have teeny weeny peas and we have people stealing them out of the garden. Maximum cards are a beautiful way to show what's going on. This is Hedwig, Harry Potter's owl, his familiar. And boy, is that a drop dead gorgeous picture. And then sometimes, especially if you're kind of old, like a lot of us, you might recognize the name Glenlivet as one of the really good single malt whiskeys. And the headmistress of Beauxbaton's school in France only served her flying horses single malt whiskey. So that made an easy connection. And then going on the internet, I'm not certain, I think this is probably Del Camp site. I'd always type in witch and wizard and see what came up. And one time I got the Dent Wizard, which was very interesting, especially for some of the spells that the wizards and witches in Harry Potter can cast to do repairs. So I thought that was a very nice find. Now it does help to have friends in other places within the hobby. For example, one person that I know, she is big into the first day covers. She had made several covers for Harry Potter. And if you notice, we have one of the US Harry Potter stamps, and we have a nice cachet that she had designed and colored. She sent them to the processing center, I think it was 50 of them, who proceeded to put on the wrong first day of issue. They put it on for the Medal of Honor stamp. Now, I used this cover because even though it's not correct, I used it to talk about all the awards that Harry and Hermione and friends got at the end of the books. Now, as a cautionary moment, you might see that the center stamp has a slight tannish border, and the 6 around it are all on gray. This is my teaching moment. It's the one page in my exhibit where I have fakes or forgeries, and it's the 6 around the center stamp. There's a couple of printers. I think one is in Israel, one used to be in Great Britain. Stick and holler, I think, who would get a picture from the movie and then turn it into stamps. And you talk about all of the paperwork, all the legalese, claiming these things were collectibles. It was funny. But in the book that I wrote on Harry Potter, I included a statement that if any of the printers wanted to challenge my use of these stamps, since these did not have a copyright, I would be more than glad to introduce them to J.K. Rowling's attorneys and counselors of law and see how long they lasted before they ended up in prison. So with that, okay, I've gone quickly, but then again, I barely have a voice left. So do we have any questions? Yeah. Frank, and Pradham, you need to unmute yourselves.
Hello.
There. Any questions?
Hey, I had a quick question. So thank you for the presentation. Just wanted to have your perspective on, rarity in certain topics like Harry Potter for that matter, right? Like how would you incorporate rarity in more of the modern themes, if you will?
Sometimes you will get lucky with misprints or especially misperfs. Those are the fairly easy ones to find. You might, depending on the country, you might find something where they just completely missed total color. Rarity is by quantity issued is a very difficult thing with it. This tends to be the area where you're going to lose points as an exhibitor. Now, you can throw in some older material. For example, I have some places where I have specifically used a revenue stamp to talk about using the picture in the middle of the revenue stamp as what I needed. And the revenue stamps were from the mid 1800s practically, if I remember correctly. So you can get around it. You'll never score high, I admit it, but you can at least control the damage.
Okay, thank you.
Now, something else is that with my exhibit, I've used it for more than just stamp shows. It has been at 4 different libraries, 4 different states, including the Cardinal Spellman Museum Library. They had it for a 3-week showing during Banned Book Week and really did up quite a spectacle with it. They got one of the local zoos to bring in some live owls. They had special crafts for the younger kids. You know, they did quite a nice job with it. They had a couple of the university teachers come in and have a very polite discussion on banned books. We got to remember that Harry Potter has been banned, especially in some of the southern states here in the US, mostly by people who have never read them. So, you know, there is nothing in Harry Potter that is worshiping a demon or a devil. You know, they're simply people, especially kids, who happen to have a special ability. You know, we have other people who are super fast runners. We have some people who have really, really good eyesight. We have some people who can swim extra great distances or extra fast. These people have the ability to do some things that otherwise are considered magic. So there is nothing in the books that's anti-religion. In fact, Harry and Hermione visit a church and a graveyard in the last book. So you got to keep that in mind for this topic. Let's see. Oh yeah, besides the libraries, I've had it at a couple of science fiction conventions, one of the world fantasy conventions. It's more a case of trying to get the word out to the people who are stamp collectors to think about Harry Potter and thematics, and to get the word out to the other people that, oh, you can take something from science fiction and put it in postage stamps, you know, go back and forth. So I was using it for, call it cross-pollination. Frank, you got a comment?
Thank you, Van.
You're back on mute, Frank.
Sorry. Thank you, Van. Thank you, fabulous presentation. I think the young man must like these exhibitions. I have no questions. Thanks again.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. We're trying to get the word out, especially post-COVID. I view here in the hobby, yes, we took a bit of a hit, or I should say, organized philately took a bit of a hit from COVID because we did not have shows. But we had a lot of people who dug out their old collections because they were bored and sitting around home, and went online and discovered, hey, there's a big community out there of other stamp collectors and people selling. So I personally view that the hobby is evolving. It's going definitely much more digital, much more online. Personally, I'm old enough, I enjoy the shows, but the hobby's not dying, not by a long shot. So the best thing we can do is to keep both going, both the digital and the shows, and the local clubs too. Okay.
You're talking about Harry Potter being banned. Now, how does that compare with when Dungeons and Dragons was coming out? Do you think it's going to overcome it like Dungeons and Dragons did eventually?
Oh, definitely. When Dungeons and Dragons came out, after a while, yes, the same religious fanatics, religious zealots, tried to get it banned in certain places here in the US. And they failed miserably because people suddenly, you know, their parents were looking at this and saying, hold it. They're playing with their friends for anywhere 4 to 6 straight hours, and they're not bothering me. They're having a good time. And it takes some brains to actually play Dungeons and Dragons. Your Dungeons and Dragons requires that you think on 3 levels all at the same time. I'm the mighty fighter going up against the dragon. Okay, Dungeon Master, what do I need to roll on my dice in order to hit said dragon? And the third one, whose turn is it to buy the pizza? So you got that aspect of it. Dungeons and Dragons is now pretty much fully accepted in the culture. You know, it's a common sight. There was the one TV series. No, you have Dungeons and Dragons games in several of the different TV series, both comedies and quasi serious and horror. You know, but it's all perfectly accepted as a rational place to start your story with it. With Harry Potter, when it first came out, the publisher got incredible feedback from the people in Great Britain. A lot of protest, but the protest was, we need a different cover on the book. I do not want to be seen riding in the tube with a children's book. But the book is too good to put down. I really need a different cover. So, and now it's one of the 2 or 3 most printed series of books in the world. It's beautifully written. It progresses in complexity 1 year at a time as the protagonists, the kids, grow. They have harder problems to solve and they succeed. It's a great way to help kids, especially like myself, what we call here in the States nerds, to find others who are accepting of us and our strange ideas and interests. Got any other questions?
How many languages has it? Are there any languages that hasn't been translated into? That you know of?
Probably, I think it's well over 20 or 30 that it's in. The problem is that there's several hundred different languages. So the other question, of course, is whether those were legitimate book publishers or whether they were translated and sold under the table, shall I say, without any money going back to J.K. Rowling. Okay,